This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with the NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back today. And we have a very interesting topic. We're going to take a look at some of the latest board governance research, and joining me to talk about that research is Donna Dabney, who's the Executive Director for the Governance Center for the Conference Board. Welcome, Donna.
Thanks, TK.
It's a pleasure
to have
you
here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And one of the reasons that you're here is that the Conference Board and the Governance Center and the NYSE participate together in creating some governance research every year that's titled Director Compensation and Board Practices. So that's one of the things that we certainly want to talk about today. But before we do that, I think it might be a good idea for our audience if you just take a minute and explain the Conference Board's Governance Center and sort of what the mission is.
Sure. Be happy to do that. The Governance Center is a unique organization. It's a membership organization that brings together both public companies and their investors in a collaborative environment. So our mission is really to improve business practices, but also to better society. And that comes from the basic mission of the Conference Board, which was established in 1916. Almost 100 years ago, after the Triangle Shirt Factory fire here in New York City. You may remember that it was a terrible sweatshop where over 400 people, mostly young women, perished in a fire in the factory. And at that time, several large corporations, the leaders of the large corporations, got together and said, if we don't get together and improve business practices, the government's going to come in and constrain our business, and it's not going to be as good as if we, creatively get together and try to improve society. So that's when the Conference Board was formed, and its mission has always been to improve business and society. So we're a nonprofit organization, business membership organization. We think that there are clear parallels to today's world as to what happened back in 1916. I mean, you can look at Bangladesh and what happened to the retail industry following that, and the whole move to try to improve business practices by businesses, proactively trying to do that. So at the Conference Board Governance Center, we have two basic initiatives that we have focused our energy on in the past year and the coming year. One is a task force on corporate investor engagement, and that came out of a belief that if investors and corporations don't get together and align with each other to improve the image and the practices of corporate governance, that they will become increasingly constrained. And we've already seen the reactionary legislation that's occurred after the crises and problems that happened in the accounting field at the turn of this last century, then the financial crisis. We've had major pieces of federal legislation that has basically taken corporate governance into a federalized kind of system overlay over the state court system. So some of those kinds of results have been good, like Say and Pay. Say and Pay has increased the amount of investor and corporate engagement, which I think everybody agrees is a good thing. It's probably given some backbone to some compensation committees to say, some of these practices just aren't appropriate, and and I think that increases public trust. So we've had some good and bad things come out of the federal legislation. What we're looking at now in the task force on investor engagement is how can investors and the public companies they engage with improve that process. So we have investors and companies engaging with each other on a sort of warfare basis when they engage in proxy contests. And then we have others that really get along pretty well with their investors. So we've spent about a year working on this. We expect to have some key findings and publications coming out in January, which will include a comprehensive white paper analyzing the optimal governance system, the balance of power between management, directors, and the public company investors. We'll take a look at guidelines for engagement. We have a number of really great governance experts who are drafting those now, and they come from the best thinking of our major investors as well as major public companies. And then we'll have a system and a list of recommendations that come out of, what is the optimal balance of power between directors and investors, and where are there gaps and where are there irritations that could come out of the system that we think could be corrected. So we're working on those now. In fact, had a long meeting yesterday with the two chairs of the task force, Pat Russo, who is a corporate director of a number of boards and former CEO, and Cy Lorne, who is currently vice chair of a hedge fund, long background in the financial industry and formerly general counsel of the SEC. So we've got some really great brain power working on this, and I'm excited about the products that's going to come out.
That sounds great. So let's get to our joint study that we talk about. And I'm going to break this into two parts. I'm going to break it into the director compensation part and then the board practices part. So, and we're never going to be able to do this justice in a 15-minute show, but I do want to hit on some highlights, then we can tell people where they can sort of get more information. But let's first talk about the board compensation part. What were the things that you found particularly interesting in that sort of came out of this year's study?
Well, let me just say that the board practices study is something that we do annually with the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. And it's a very comprehensive, overview of all kinds of practices. So it's like a reference book. You would pick it up not because you want to read it all the way through in one sitting. But in terms of board compensation, I think we're just seeing a continuation of the trend that we have been seeing. Director compensation continues to increase. The median for larger companies is $240,000. And the median for smaller companies is $53,300, which is a fairly robust compensation when you consider that the work is typically 6 to 8 meetings per year, sometimes more depending on what's going on with the company. And we're talking here a median. If we talked about the average, you would see perhaps different numbers because there are a number of outliers. There are some companies that pay quite a lot more than $240,000. I think one of the more interesting things is that the largest portion of director compensation, and this is true across the board, whether it's small companies or large companies, the largest portion is equity. So companies are really trying to align the director's interest with the shareholders who elect them. So you're seeing a lot more equity being granted to directors.
So when we look at the board practices side of that, what was, and it's so broad, I mean, I remember we asked so many questions relative to that, but is there anything that from a viewer's point of view that sort of struck you that said, boy, that's something I didn't expect?
There are a number of things I think that are interesting. To me, and first of all, let me say to anybody who's watching out there and that filled out that survey, thank you very much. It's because we have that data that, that we can publish it, and it depends on you filling out that survey, which when I was working for a corporation, I used to fill it out, and I know that it's not easy. But I think the big thing that came through to me is the profound difference between larger corporations and smaller corporations. There has been a sea change in board practices in the last 10 to 12 years among the larger corporations. It has not been seen so much in the smaller corporations. So in the larger corporations, one of the major changes, and this I think is really critical in terms of election of directors, is majority voting. 97% of manufacturing and non-financial services companies who have a size of over $20 billion, 97% of them have some form of majority voting. And that's just astounding. If you looked at that 5-10 years ago, it wouldn't be you just wouldn't even see it. In financial services companies with assets over 100 billion, it's about 86% of those also have majority votings, and this is some form of majority voting. There are never a number of different forms that you can see, but you can compare that with companies with revenues below 100 million. Only 6.7% of them have a mandatory majority voting, so it's quite a difference between the larger and smaller companies in this point.
Don't you think you'll see that trickle down, though? Isn't that, as time goes, we'll see it hit the mid caps, and then it'll trickle down to the small caps?
I think you're exactly right, TK. And in fact, when you talk to investors, they say, you know, well, we've done our work with the large companies, and now we're going to focus on the mid caps, and you know, you will definitely see that happen. So I think mid caps companies would do well to kind of see what the large caps did, what happened, you know, what were the things that were going on to cause them to change their practices.
Sort of pre-think that rather than waiting for
right.
the big, with a big call.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The one thing you don't want is to get a shareholder proposal kind of thrown over the transom without any anticipation that that's going to happen or how you're going to deal with it.
Right. Big issue.
So, this is also true if you look at just, the independence of directors as well, same thing. It used to be that directors were largely chosen by discussions with the CEO or other directors, like who do you know, let's ask them to join the board. Now you see more than 70% of companies with $1 billion or more in revenues are actually engaging outside search firms. So you're really seeing a professionalization of the board of directors, and it's been pretty profound. Again, there's a difference between large companies and small companies. Only 23% of companies under $100 million actually engage executive search firms.
You know, we had an interesting discussion about this on a previous show, and I think, again, starting with Sarbanes-Oxley, everything, and the listing requirements, everybody has done a good job on the independence. The discussion we had was whether that pendulum had actually swung too far. That sometimes you're getting people that weren't knowledgeable about the industry. Yes, they were independent, but I think it's important to make sure that you don't put independence out there so far that you're not getting knowledgeable directors on. That was one of the worries that I had about the financial services industry. Yeah.
That's exactly right. A number of commentators have noted that after the financial crisis, who was in the boardroom? Did they really know the financial products that were being sold by the business that they were overseeing? So, one of the ideas I think it's very intriguing on that in that line is, there have been a number of criticisms of long-serving directors, that maybe they've been on the board too long or whatever. But I think one of the benefits of long-serving directors is that you get a director with deep company knowledge. It takes a while, particularly if you're in a cyclical industry or you just need to understand the business because it's very complex. It takes a while to do that. And you may not really become a seasoned director until you've had a number of years' experience on the board. So I don't think, it's like, I don't think we ought to throw out all the seasoned directors with gray hair.
Well, it's a great debate. That is a great debate, because you look at all that's happening with digital and social media as a long-term director keeping pace, and then there's the argument that you just made for them. So somewhere there's a blend of making sure that your composition takes in both critical issues, that makes a good board. Right. So, well, Donna, we only have a couple minutes left, but you've been in the trenches for this in your days when you were with Alcoa, and now here you are seeing it from the bigger picture. Sort of, how effective? What's your take on how effective boards are today? And if you had to pinpoint one thing, what do you think could still use some improvement?
Well, I think boards are just completely much more effective than they were in the past. I have been in the boardroom as a corporate secretary for over 15 years. And when I first started out, there's quite a large difference between what's going on now. Like I mentioned earlier, you have much more professional directors. They are more independent. They are more experienced. They bring more things to the table. They are much more attuned to what their oversight role is, particularly with regard to oversight of strategy and the risks inherent in setting corporate strategy. I think that, as somebody who's been in the boardroom for a long time, I have deep respect for directors and what they do. I think the one thing that I would say that needs to happen is that that kind of experience is not available to everybody. And so we need to find a way to let the public and the investment community really understand the quality of directors we have, what they do in the boardroom, what are their practices, what are their processes, what are they thinking when they look at various business opportunities. I think we need to do as a business and as a business organization that I belong to, I think we need to do a better job of explaining that. We don't have to go into confidential decisions, but we do, I think, need to help people understand that we have a pretty good set of directors running our public companies, and though there will always be bad apples and there will always be people that don't perform up to the top level, I think that overall we have a very good system.
So on the research, members and non-members can get copies of this. We only obviously touch the service. So,
right.
So what's the address as far as getting somebody in to
So you just go to our website, which is www.conference-board.org. And I know it's not necessarily the easiest one to navigate, but you will see there in our publications, under a drop-down box as publications, you will find this publication, and you can, whether you're a member or non-member, you can order it.
Yeah.
It'll cost you some money if you're not a member.
Yeah. Well, Donna, thank you again for joining us.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Yeah. And before we leave, I just want to remind everybody, our viewers, that on October 2nd and 3rd and 4th, but specifically on October 2nd, we will be holding our traditional board committee chair peer exchanges. This is something that is probably one of the best things that the corporate board member does. A great opportunity for you, if you sit on the chair of a committee, to sit with others and learn a great deal. That will be on October 2nd. That is followed by October 3rd and 4th with our annual Boardroom Summit. You have a chance to hear John Bogle from Vanguard and some great speakers. I think you'll find it very interesting. So with that, we hope you enjoyed today's show. We'll see you again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.